There are bands that define a genre, and then there are bands that devour every genre they touch and make it their own. Led Zeppelin were always the second kind. From the moment they exploded onto the scene in 1969, they made the rules and then broke every single one of them whenever it suited them. Hard rock, folk, blues, Eastern mysticism, nothing was off limits. But even by their own standards, what they did in 1979 caught everyone off guard. At the height of the disco era, when rock fans were literally burning records in stadiums and screaming that disco was the enemy, Led Zeppelin released a song with a groove that would have felt right at home on any dance floor in America. It charted, it sold, and almost nobody called them out for it. This is the story of how the gods of rock quietly made one of the best-selling disco songs of their era and got away with it completely. The world they were walking into. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what 1979 actually felt like, because it was not just a year, it was a war. Disco had taken over everything. The radio, the charts, the clubs, the culture. Songs like Le Freak by Chic and I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor were not just hits, they were phenomena. Saturday Night Fever had come out just 2 years earlier and completely rewired what popular music was supposed to sound like. If you wanted to sell records in 1979, you needed a groove, you needed a beat people could move to, and you needed it fast. But on the other side of that dance floor, something ugly was brewing. Rock fans were furious. They felt like their music had been pushed aside, dismissed, and replaced by something they considered shallow and disposable. The tension exploded on July 12, 1979, at Comiskey Park in Chicago. A radio DJ named Steve Dahl organized what he called Disco Demolition Night. Fans packed the stadium, brought disco records, and watched them get blown up on the field. It turned into a riot. The game had to be canceled. That is how angry people were. And right in the middle of all that noise, Led Zeppelin quietly walked into the studio and made something that nobody expected. Something that had a pulse, a shimmy, and a groove that disco fans would have recognized immediately. The question is, how did that even happen? John Bonham's Secret Weapon. Before we talk about the song itself, we need to talk about the man who made it possible. Because without John Bonham, none of this works. John Bonham was already considered the greatest rock drummer alive by the time 1979 rolled around. That was not a controversial opinion, it was just a fact. The man had a gift that went beyond power and speed. He had a feeling, that rare, almost impossible quality where every single hit lands exactly where it needs to land. Not a millisecond early, not a millisecond late, just perfect. But what he did on Fool in the Rain was something different, something special even by his own extraordinary standards. He played what drummers call a halftime shuffle. It is a pattern where the snare hits on beat 3 instead of the usual 2 and 4, while the hi-hat keeps a syncopated groove on top. On paper, that sounds simple. In practice, it is incredibly difficult to pull off cleanly. Most drummers can attempt it. Very few can make it feel effortless. Bonham made it feel effortless. He made it feel like breathing. That shuffle is what gave Fool in the Rain its disco DNA. It is what made the song move the way it moves. It is what made people tap their feet without even realizing they were doing it. Bonham did not just play a beat, he built the entire emotional foundation of the song from the ground up. And he did it in a single take. How it happened. To understand how Fool in the Rain came to exist, you have to understand what was happening inside Led Zeppelin at that moment. Because by 1978, the band that had conquered the world was quietly falling apart at the seams. The trouble had started years earlier, but it all came to a head in 1977. During their American tour that year, Robert Plant received the most devastating news a parent can receive. His 5-year-old son Karash had died suddenly from a stomach infection back home in England. Plant left the tour immediately, and the entire thing was cancelled. The grief that followed was something he carried for years, and it changed him in ways that were impossible to ignore. When he eventually came back to the band, he came back a different man, quieter, more reflective, and hungry to write about something real.
When the mountains washed away, now I'm singing all my songs to the girl.
Jimmy Page, on the other hand, was disappearing in a different direction entirely. His personal struggles during this period were well documented, and his involvement in the writing and recording sessions for their next album was noticeably limited compared to earlier records. The band that had always operated as a tight creative unit was now running on uneven footing, with some members more present than others. That vacuum was filled by John Paul Jones, quietly, methodically, and with the kind of musical confidence that only someone of his skill level could carry. Jones brought keyboards, new textures, and new rhythmic ideas into the sessions. He pushed the band toward sounds they had never seriously explored before, and nobody argued with him because everything he touched sounded undeniably good. The result of all of this was In Through the Outdoor, recorded in Stockholm in late 1978. It was an album born out of grief, tension, and reinvention. And sitting right in the middle of that complicated creative moment was a song with a disco groove, a samba breakdown, and a drum beat that would quietly outlive almost everything else Zeppelin ever recorded, the song itself. So what exactly makes Fool in the Rain so special? Because on the surface it sounds like a simple story. A man waiting on a street corner for a woman who never shows up, only to realize halfway through the song that he has been standing on the wrong street the entire time. It is almost comedic in its setup. But the music underneath that story is anything but simple. The song opens with that Bonham shuffle immediately. No build-up, no introduction, just that irresistible rolling groove landing right in your lap from the very first second. Robert Plant's vocal sits on top of it with a lightness that feels completely different from the thunderous Zeppelin everyone knew. He is not wailing here, he is almost conversational, telling his little story with a smile in his voice.
We'll stand in the rain on the corner. I'll watch the people go shuffling.
John Paul Jones's bass locks in with Bonham so tightly that the two of them essentially become one instrument, creating a low end that is warm and bouncy rather than heavy and crushing. Then comes the moment that genuinely surprises every first-time listener. Around the 3-minute mark, the song completely transforms. The rock groove drops away entirely, and what replaces it is a full samba breakdown. Whistles, percussion, the whole thing. It sounds like the band suddenly teleported to Rio de Janeiro in the middle of a London recording session. It is unexpected, joyful, and completely committed. There is no hesitation in it, no sense that the band is unsure whether this belongs in a Led Zeppelin song. They play it like it is the most natural thing in the world, and somehow that confidence makes it work. Jimmy Page's guitar solo that follows the breakdown is understated by his own standards, melodic and clean rather than explosive, which is exactly the right choice for a song built on feel rather than force. Everything about Fool in the Rain is a study in restraint from a band that was never known for restraint, and that is precisely what makes it so fascinating: the reception. When In Through the Outdoor was released in August 1979, the reaction was complicated. On one hand, the album debuted at #1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom, which proved that Led Zeppelin's commercial power was still completely intact. Fans bought it in enormous numbers, simply because it was Led Zeppelin, and that name still meant something undeniable. But the critical response told a different story. A lot of rock journalists were uncomfortable with what they were hearing. The keyboards, the softer textures, the disco-inflected grooves, it all felt like a departure from the band they thought they knew. Some reviews were polite but confused. Others were openly dismissive, suggesting that Zeppelin had lost their edge or were chasing trends rather than setting them. The hardcore fan base was similarly divided. Some listeners embraced the new direction immediately and recognized it for what it was, a band refusing to repeat itself. Others felt genuinely unsettled, like something essential had been traded away for something shinier and more commercial. The debate around In Through the Outdoor never fully resolved itself, and in many ways, it still hasn't. Fool in the Rain was released as a single in December 1979 and reached number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. For a deep album cut from a band that rarely chased radio play, that was a genuinely significant result. It got airplay, it found an audience, and it did something that very few Led Zeppelin songs had ever done before. It made people want to move rather than just listen. And yet, almost nobody at the time connected the dots publicly and called it what it was: a disco song made by the kings of rock that worked completely on its own terms. The legacy. Here is the thing about Led Zeppelin that separates them from almost every other band in rock history. They never stayed in one place long enough for anyone to fully pin them down. From their very first album, they were pulling from blues, folk, Eastern music, and hard rock simultaneously, blending everything together into something that had no clean label and no obvious precedent. That restlessness was not a weakness. It was their greatest strength. Fool in the Rain is perhaps the purest expression of that quality. It is a song that should not exist by any conventional logic. The heaviest band in the world, at the peak of their powers, recording a track with a disco groove and a samba breakdown in the middle of a cultural war between rock and dance music. It makes no sense on paper. And yet, when you actually sit down and listen to it, it makes complete and total sense, because it sounds exactly like Led Zeppelin. Confident, committed, and completely unbothered by what anyone else thinks. The song's chart performance was modest by mainstream standards, but remarkable by Zeppelin's own history with singles. Reaching number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100 was not a number one hit, but for a band that had spent most of their career actively avoiding radio-friendly formats and single releases, it represented something meaningful. People outside their core fan base were finding the song, responding to it, and playing it repeatedly. That does not happen by accident. In the decades since its release, Fool in the Rain has grown considerably in reputation among musicians and serious music listeners. Drummers in particular treat Bonham's halftime shuffle on the track as a masterclass, something to be studied and respected rather than simply enjoyed. It appears regularly on lists of the greatest drum performances ever recorded, not because of its power or its speed, but because of its feel and its precision. That kind of respect from fellow musicians is often a more reliable measure of a song's true worth than any chart position ever could be. The broader legacy of In Through the Outdoor itself is also worth acknowledging. It was the last album Led Zeppelin completed before John Bonham's death in September 1980 brought the band to an end. In many ways, Fool in the Rain became part of the final statement of one of the greatest bands rock music has ever produced. There is something quietly poignant about that. A band at a crossroads, experimenting and evolving and refusing to stand still, captured on tape just before everything stopped forever. What Fool in the Rain ultimately proves is something that gets lost in the noise of genre wars and cultural debates. Great musicians do not belong to one sound. They belong to music itself. Led Zeppelin could play anything because they understood everything. The blues taught them feelings. Folk taught them texture. Eastern music taught them space. And apparently, even disco had something worth taking. They took it, made it their own, and left behind a song that still sounds fresh decades later. That is not a small thing. That is exactly what separates the legends from everyone else. Led Zeppelin never asked for permission to evolve, they just did it, on their own terms, every single time. Fool in the Rain is proof that the greatest artists never stop surprising you. If this story reminded you why Zeppelin still matters, hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment telling us your favorite deep cut from their catalog. We read every single one.